All right, welcome back. As promised, we're going to dive into characters. I've got my trusty Starbucks here and a bunch of slides, and want to just take the time to dig a little deeper into character. Now, this is not a characterization course. However, for you to be able to really dive deeper into your plot and figure out what all the layers should be, you have to have strong characters. And so that's what I want to spend about the next 15 or 20 minutes talking about, is how can you build characters that are layered and are really going to pull your reader into the story. So remember this from the booklet I put together for you on the very basic what ifs. How do we get started? So I wanted to give you an example as we're getting launched. And this is an example. This is the book that I told you in the last video I just turned in the macro edits. So it's a legal romantic suspense, which means there are at least 4 plot lines for the heroine, and there are really 2 or 3 for the hero. He's fully developed. My editor was like, I wish you had a hero-making factory because he's fantastic. But the story is really Jamie's story. So delayed justice is a tricky one. Jamie is a secondary character. There's this group of 4 women who are out of law school a few years, and this series is following their careers now that they're 4 or 5 years out of law school. And so she's sitting there, and I've got this character. She's shown up in a few scenes in each of the other books, but she's not fully fleshed out. I really thought hers was going to be book 4, not book 3. But you go with what your editors and the salespeople want you to do. So I had to start thinking, what's her inciting incident? Now, a little of her backstory is I knew she had a dark story. It was very clear from the very first scene she showed up in that her past was dark. Some terrible things had happened to her. But what wasn't so clear is what those things were. So I knew she'd been set up to have a harder backstory, but what was that going to look like today? So I started going, okay, I think it's childhood sexual abuse. Ugh, not a place I really want to go, but that's what the character was demanding. And so I had to go with that. It means I had to do a lot of research to figure out, okay, what would that look like if you were abused as an 8-year-old? What would that look like as a 28-year-old, as a 29-year-old? What evolution would she go through? How would she self-medicate for the pain that she had experienced? So if that's in her background, then I have to stop and think, what's going to be the inciting incident that kicks off the whole story? So without giving too much of it away, for her, she's going after her abuser. She now feels like she's strong enough and whole enough that at 28, 29, she can now try and hold her abuser accountable. Fortunately, the law allows for that, especially in Virginia where the story is set. There is no statute of limitation. So I had to dig and ask lots of questions to make sure I was getting that piece right, because otherwise the whole story fell apart. So it's a good example of the characters demanding one thing, but I have to make sure it actually works in the real world, because I'm not creating a country, I'm not creating a legal system, I'm working within ours right here. So then I start the what ifs. So I love this from Jane Kirkpatrick, who's an award-winning, best-selling author in the Christian world, where she talks about one of the key things you want to learn about your story is whose story is it? So in a sense, it was easy for me with Delayed Justice because I knew it was Jamie's story. It was her turn to step to the forefront. If you're writing women's fiction, it may not be as clear. A couple of my friends, excuse me, write award-winning women's fiction, and I always admire them because that is a story that in some ways is much more complex even than the legal suspense that I'm writing, because these are sister stories. And so you've got to balance 3 POVs between the sisters, and you may have a hero's perspective, or you may have a parent's perspective. And so you start getting all these multiple layers, but you still have to know whose story is it for the overarching book. But then I would also say take this micro. Whose story is it in this particular scene? That will help you know whose point of view to write that particular scene from. And sometimes, like in romance, you'll do it from both points of view, but you really need to think about who has the most to lose and make the scene be from their perspective. All right, so creating characters, occupations, you don't have to write what you know. It helps. I'll admit being an attorney has definitely helped me writing this legal series. There's a lot I just already know, but even with that, I have been begging my law school mentor, okay, I need an alum who's in criminal defense. I need an alum who's over here. And so even though I am an attorney, I've practiced as an attorney, I'm a professor, I am still asking a lot of questions to make sure I get it right. Look for things like the FBI Citizens Academy. Most local police and sheriff's offices will have similar things that allow you, these are programs that take you behind the scenes and let you see what is the job really like. Shadow people, read books. I have books on, I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he's the guy who created forensic entomology. And it's the kind of stuff I could take classes. Actually, the key classes for this are taught in Indiana, about an hour and a half north of me. I don't want to go see it. I don't want to see decomposing bodies, but I've read books on it. So I understand the science behind it. Plus, being at Purdue, they have a forensic entomology department here. So when I write a book that becomes an issue, I'm going to be knocking on some professors' doors and saying, help me understand this. One thing I have learned, though, is that people love to be asked about this. They love to be asked about their careers, their passions, and most of the time people aren't asking that. So when you do, don't be hesitant to say, hey, I'd really like to understand. I think your job's pretty cool. All right, so what does the plot require? So this is something that you have to really think about. And some of you are going, but I'm a seat of the pants, I just know my characters. That's fine. That's where Jeff Gerke's book can be amazingly helpful. But sometimes you know the plot, and so you have to start from there. So Beyond Justice was the first legal suspense. But Shadowed by Grace is actually my best example of this. I had discovered a book, it's Robert Edsel's book on the Monuments Men, and as soon as I was reading it, I knew I wanted to set a couple of my World War II novels with the Monuments Men. And so Shadowed by Grace is the one I have written so far. It won a Christian Retailers Award, finaled in the Holt Award, so I'm really proud of this story. It turned out great, but what was tricky is I knew the hero was a Monuments Man. That was very straightforward. I knew I wanted it to be in Italy because the second book would be in Paris and the third book would be in Germany. So I was kind of following, the plan is to follow the Monuments Men across Europe. But the challenge was, how do I find a realistic career for a woman that would put her in Italy immediately behind the front lines? Just think about that a second. You may not know a lot about World War II, but you would probably know enough to know that's not going to be easy. And I knew I didn't want her to be a nurse. I was looking for things that were a little different. My friend Sarah Sundin writes amazing World War II novels, and one of them was set around nurses. And so I didn't want to step into that space because she already does it really well. So I started doing research, and it was all about the plot requires a heroine to be in Italy during World War II in 1944. How am I going to do this? And so I literally was in the children's section of the library with my kids, and they're going looking through books, and I'm looking through the World War II section going, I need some inspiration, and found a book on women reporters. And so that became what I did, and it worked out great. I was able to find, in that case, it was actually quite a few children's books, nonfiction books that had great details about the women who were reporters and like the uniforms, the patches they would have, just all this detail that I could then fold in. I also found information about the different women who had filled those roles, and there was a photographer. There's actually a woman photographer in the Pacific on the islands with the men. And I was like, no, thank you. That's way too much. But it let me know that it was realistic, that I could plop a woman in this place and it would work. So that would be an example of I'm finding the character based on what the plot requires. In Stars in the Night, it's another World War II. This is a suspense, a romantic suspense. I call it Murder on the Orient Express meets Hollywood in World War II. So there was a real event, the Hollywood Victory Caravan, which I think it was May of 1942, so shortly after the United States had officially joined the war, they put a whole bunch of A-list stars, Bing Crosby, Groucho Marx, Laurel and Hardy, and it was literally filled with these stars that, if I could remember all their names, you would recognize them. And they put them on a train and they went from Hollywood to DC, had their first event at the White House, and then went north and had war bond fundraising events all across the north. And so I was like, I wanted to build on that. And so I was going to have them go across, start at the White House, and then go south, but I had to create a whole bunch of stars. So Audra, the gal who's, you can't see it, but I'm pointing my pointer at the heroine there. She's actually an attorney because I knew at some point I would probably write legal. So I started putting little legal characters in. So she's an attorney, but it's 1942, so she's not able to practice yet. And I had to kind of create this whole thing around her. But what I wanted to show you with this quote, and I'll pull it up so you can see it a little better. This is 2 sentences about her mother, Audra's mother, and I think it tells you a whole lot about her, the characterization of her in just a couple sentences. And it's by showing. I'm showing the dropped stitches, and that's the clue to Audra that something is not going well. So what can you do to build characters? I've already talked about Jeff Gerke's book, and Please Understand Me, the temperament book. Fantastic. My friend Tricia Goyer was the one who turned me on to 45 Master Characters. Love, 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 love this. So basically what it does is it takes Greek mythology, and you've got your female goddesses and your male gods, and what the author did is she took all these different archetypes of characters and then said, here's who they are, here's what they like to do, here's their weaknesses, like if they go to the bad side, this is what they would look like. It tells you which characters they should be paired with, who the mentor should be for this particular god or goddess, who the love interest should be. And so it becomes a really great way to build some variety in and make sure you're not just having the same character over and over again. So for example, in the Hidden Justice series, which Beyond Justice, Imperfect Justice, and then Delayed Justice are in, one of the things I did as I was plotting it out is for the 4 heroines, I sat down and I figured out, okay, which of these goddesses were they going to be like? So let's see if I can remember. I think Jamie's Athena, because I think that's the Wonder Woman Amazon. And then Caroline is going to be Hestia, because I think she's the one who's the keeper of the fire. And so then what I did is I was able to figure out, how can I make the hero different? And what this did is it allowed me to intentionally make sure that while all the heroines are attorneys, they're not the same character. And then make sure that all the heroes didn't suddenly feel like the same person. And so it was one tool that allowed me to create some variety that, like I mentioned, has my editor going, man, these are all great. I want more of these. So here's some more information on the Myers-Briggs. So I'll pull this up so you can see it a little bit better. This website is where you can go and you can actually take a short Myers-Briggs test as the character. You know, just kind of imagine that you're them and how would they answer the questions. And then that'll tell you who they are. So like I'm an ESTJ or ESTP, depending on the day I take it. And so that tells me I like people, but extrovert is more than that. It's like, where do you get your energy? The sensing means that I quickly take in a lot of information. The thinking means I can process it quickly. And then the judging means I move pretty quickly. So it's a pretty strong leadership type of personality. So once I have kind of that background, that's then when I start looking at physical characteristics. So Hayden, the heroine in Beyond Justice, the photo I have is Keira Knightley. The hero in Beyond Justice is Andrew, the heroine in the next book, but she's also Hayden's roommate, Emily. Well, they're Derek and Julia Ho or Huff or however you say their last name. And so then I can go, okay, this is what they look like. Now, as an author, I very intentionally do not spend a lot of time fleshing out what the character looks like. I give enough details so you as the reader can kind of formulate that. Other people write amazing descriptions. That's just kind of a personal preference thing. So you'll know what is your voice, what's your style. Then you can start looking at birth order, family of origin. Is it an intact? Is it a divorced family? Are there stepbrothers and sisters? Are they an only? Those kinds of things. What's their love language? How are they on emotional intelligence? Those sorts of things. And then characters have to be likable. Even villains. This was something that I was told fairly early in this writing career that I really, really liked. Even villains have somebody who loves them. Nobody is truly entirely evil, or at least very, very, very rarely does that happen. So either they have a grandma they've taken care of, or they have a stray cat. But there needs to be something that we can all relate to. So then I also have a few of these tools down here. One I would add to it is Pinterest. So I didn't plan on doing this, but I think I can. So let me see, maybe. And I'll see if I can't take you to my Pinterest board so I can show you what I mean. I always tell people this is a Putman class. You never know. Whoops, I don't know why it went there. Oh, shoot. Okay, I'm not going to be able to. I'll do that in a later one when I've got all my login information. But one of the things that I do as part of my research and my writing is that I, sorry, I got a little distracted looking up. Okay, there we go. As I find a picture, like those pictures of Keira Knightley and Derek and Julia, I throw them on a Pinterest board. And it might be secret while I'm writing, but then when I am ready to, the book's getting ready to come out, I make it public. And I've got a header that I put on them so that they all look uniform. And I tell people, if you want to know what I think the characters look like, here's where you can go. I also do this with the houses. So I will often have an actual house that I'm thinking of. And so I'll go to Quillow or one of those kinds of Zillow. I'll go to Zillow or Realtor.com and I'll find a house. So I have pictures of the inside. And so in Beyond Justice, you can go to the Pinterest page and you can see the exact house. It's a townhouse in Old Town Alexandria that it's their place. One thing I learned, though, is when you're using those realtor listings, you have to pin each image because when that listing goes down, any images you didn't pin will disappear. And it's really helpful when you're writing. It's also really helpful to give to your editor so that they can see what you were seeing. I also have created a series guide for Hidden Justice, which is, right now, it's probably about a 15-page document, where anytime I write something about a character, I capture it in there. Because we don't know how long this series is going to be. We know it'll be at least 4 books. These characters will keep showing up. And so I wanted a relatively easy way that we could all stay on the same page. I mean, I've even gotten there which Chinese food they've ordered. Because I'm like, at some point in time, they'll probably order that again. Inside Out was one of the books I held up for you in the last video, and here are some of the questions that Susie May Warren says you really need to think about with your characters when you're creating them. Who am I? What's their identity? What do they value, fear? What are their dreams? What's the thing they would do at all costs, that deepest desire that motivates them? And then what's their area of competence? Everybody has something they're really, really good at. And so you need to know what that is. You could call it a superpower as well. Sometimes you'll hear Susan May Warren or Rachel Helk, that's what they'll call it. And if you read my legal suspense books, I actually have the characters tell you what they think their superpower is. And so I'm also being intentional to keep those different across the books. What's their security blanket? What do they go to when life is falling apart? And then where do they belong? How do they move from lie to a truth? And we'll talk about that more when we get into the internal layer. So think of the story goals. How are you going to reveal them? So that little snippet from Stars in the Night, that was showing you how you can reveal character through action. It was the act of knitting that showed you something about the mother. And then what's the alternative? What's going wrong? What's their flaw? Everybody has flaws. I could give you a whole list of mine. But make sure that none of your characters are perfect. That's not going to ring true to life. And then really think about what is the darkness in your character's past? And how does that affect them today? And how can you force them to confront that in this story? So these questions are why I'm asking you to think about your characters as part of layering. Because I hope you're beginning to see that when you know some of these things, like, okay, what are my characters' flaws? What's their past? You can start layering in more motivation, more angst that's going to make the character more real and their journey more compelling. All right. Also, this is the last thing because I'm getting a little long. Oh, I'm at 19 minutes. Really think about how can your character help point us as readers to our better selves and to becoming our better selves. So this right here, a great character opens us to ranges of potential, a riot of passionate response to the problems of existence. So this is one of the things that Donald Moss talks a lot about in writing the breakout novel, that when you've got those novels that readers really resonate with, it's usually because the characters are so great. And there's this evolution and development that occurs over time. All right, so that's where we're going to end with this video. With the next one, I'll start diving into the actual layers. I know you were beginning to wonder, is Cara ever going to get there? But we're headed that direction right now. All right, so thank you for joining me. Again, I'm Cara Putman, and this was a class on creating characters that are going to be rich and fully developed for your readers.